Hey everyone! So let's talk about contracts. They are literally everywhere, right? From that freelance gig you're starting to a huge business deal. But have you ever wondered how you go from just a simple promise to a truly ironclad agreement? Well, today we're going to build a contract from the ground up so you can see exactly what makes them tick. So, what is it? What's the real difference between you telling a friend, yeah, sure, I'll help you move this weekend, and you signing a lease for a new apartment? I mean, one is just a casual promise, but the other can have some pretty serious legal consequences. It all boils down to a few key ingredients that turn a simple agreement into a binding contract. At the heart of it all is this idea of contract management. Now, I know that might sound like some stuffy corporate term, but it's not. It's really just a simple way of making sure everyone is on the same page. It's about maximizing what you get out of the deal and, just as important, minimizing your risk. Okay, so if you want to build a contract that actually holds up, you need 5 essential building blocks. You can think of this as the absolute non-negotiable DNA of any valid agreement. And trust me, if even one of these is missing, your whole contract could just fall apart. So here they are: offer, acceptance, consideration, legality, and capacity. It all has to start with an offer, right? That offer then has to be met with acceptance. Then both sides have to exchange something of value. We call that consideration. And of course, the whole deal has to be for a legal purpose, and everybody involved has to have the mental capacity to actually understand what they're signing. It seems simple on the surface, but you know what they say? The devil is in the details. Now, the one element that really seems to trip people up is consideration. Just think of it as the what's in it for me part of the agreement. For a contract to be valid, there has to be a real bargained for exchange. So, getting paid for your work? That's totally valid consideration. But promising to give someone a gift or paying for a favor they already did for you last year, that doesn't count because it's not a true back and forth exchange. Okay, so once you've got those 5 core elements locked in, it is time to put it all in writing. The physical document, the contract itself, actually has its own anatomy, a kind of standard framework of clauses that gives the agreement its shape and its strength. And you're almost always going to see these key parts. It starts with the basics, who's involved, and how long the contract lasts. Then it dives into the promises, the duties, and, super critically, how the contract can actually end. It'll even lay out how you'll handle any disagreements, often through something called ADR, or Alternative Dispute Resolution, which is basically a way to solve problems without having to go to court. And that brings us to a super important point. Always know your exit strategy. That termination clause? That's your way out if things go south. It defines exactly how and when the agreement can be ended. You should never, ever sign a contract without understanding that part completely. Now, for anyone out there in a creative or a tech field, this next term is an absolute must-know. Intellectual property. Who owns the logo you design, the code you write, or the book you draft under this agreement? Getting this defined clearly from day one is so essential if you want to avoid some massive headaches and fights down the road. And finally, the signatures. It might seem obvious, but this is the moment. This is when the contract becomes a live, real, executed document. It's the formal act of saying, yep, I agree to every single thing we've laid out here. Without that signature, all you have is a piece of paper. So we've built the contract, but the work is not over yet. A contract really has a life of its own, and managing that life cycle is totally key. This whole journey takes it from just an idea all the way to a properly stored and filed document. This journey usually happens in 3 main phases. First up is negotiation, where you're hammering out all the details and terms. Next, you have execution. That's the official signing we just talked about. And last, but definitely not least, is documentation, safely storing the original contract and any changes so you can always go back and look at it. Contracts aren't just about services or getting a job. When you really get down to it, they're about exchanging and managing property, your stuff. And it's really important to know that contracts can govern a few different kinds of property. Generally, property falls into 3 buckets. First, you've got real property. That's the immovable stuff, like land and buildings. Then there's personal property, which is pretty much anything you can move around, from a laptop to your office furniture. And finally, there's intellectual property. These are creations of the mind, like software code or music. Understanding which type of property you're dealing with really shapes the kind of contract you're going to need. All right, we have covered a lot of the theory, so let's wrap this up with a practical toolkit. Think of these as the key mindsets you should have whenever you're dealing with a contract, whether it's for your business or just in your personal life. So here are your big takeaways.
Always, and I mean always, get it in writing. Read every single word. Keep copies of everything. Negotiate in good faith. That just means being honest and fair. Pay really close attention to any deadlines. And hey, if something isn't clear, get it sorted out as quickly and as fairly as you can. This is basically your personal checklist for protecting yourself.
Which leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We focus so much on the legal language, all the clauses, the signatures, but in a world full of these seemingly ironclad documents, what's the real role of good faith? Of simple honesty and fairness between people. It's something worth thinking about, because at the end of the day, every single contract is still just an agreement between human beings.